Basically, food noise is ever-present internal harm. It's a constant focus on food that actually distracts you from your aim. So let's say I'm struggling with overnutrition. That is, I have conditions that are related to overnutrition. So food noise becomes the dominant voice that sort of drives you towards the bad habit of going for the food that you will otherwise not get the value out of it in terms of your nutrition goals. So this voice tells you, just reminds you of a burger, reminds you of a sausage, it reminds you of the thing that you are fighting against, maybe your stomach, maybe that. So it becomes a constant reminder that you need to eat, whether you are full or not full. So that definition instantly reminded me of my loudest food noise and the irresistible call of a perfectly brewed cup of African tea. It is one of the loudest food noise that I have. It is not, for me, African tea is not just a drink, it's a memory. For me, it's a ritual and it's actually a story. A story that I want us to dive into. Yeah? And a story that shaped me and that wants to make me reflect on my good memories of an African tea that shapes who I am today. And I intentionally choose to revisit this good memory. Recalling of a good memory is a best practice to activate your brain reward system.
Look how happy we were.
I remember that trip.
It's beautiful here.
This is a research that has been backed up by scientific evidence. So I got into this habit because I realized that I had a tendency of sobbing over or mopping over bad memories. And the results were sort of derailing me on bringing me back to anxiety, depression, and all this bad stuff, and different lobes. And that is the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, the frontal lobe, depending on the positionality that you give. So what happens is that when you recall a good memory, you do what we call neuroactivation of the reward system. And this is when I realized that when you think of a good memory, you are activating your part of the brain that gives you reward system, reduces stress, strengthens your emotional resilience, and just brings you to a powerful space where you feel that you're in charge of your emotions. So, as I was getting into deep research and just to understand what is happening in terms of recalling, I realized that it activates your neural system to bring about a reward. So the brain has, and now this is basically when you're looking at the striatum and the prefrontal cortex. So what happened is that the act of you recalling a good memory sends signals to the brain to activate specific neurotransmitters and your nerves to light up in the corticostriatal circuitry. And this is specifically in the striatum and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. So these are the same reward related circuits. So take these as circuits. They have gotten a signal that there's need for a reward. And this is the same that happens when you win money or you achieve something big. The circuitry that you feel is this stronger positive emotion that you feel and the greater activity. When it was done under monitoring of the brain activity during this experiment, we realized that when you're treating your brain with happy memories, you activate intrinsic rewards. So another aspect that comes about so clearly is the effect on reduction of stress. So when you are activating, when you're recalling a good memory, first of all, you tend to calm down. and you tend to breathe. So this positive reminiscence does not just make you feel good, but it also cuts on your stress hormone, that is cortisol. So research has revealed that when you're recalling joyful moments right after a stressful event, so at that time when you feel that you're very stressed out, there is need for you to recall that wonderful event that you have. What you're doing is that you're reducing your cortisol level. This was a study that was done by Delgado, and it was found that people who tend to recall their happy memories would recover faster from stress related issues. And when it was compared to those who did not, it was seen as the opposite. So, what it does is that when you're recalling a good memory, it quiets down the issues related to anxiety. Another factor is that it activates the neurochemical path, and this has a psychological impact. So the brain has a neurochemical such as dopamine and serotonin. And when you're living a joyous experience, this is just like looking at old photos or sharing stories. What happens is that you trigger the release of dopamine and also release other neurochemicals such as serotonin and endorphins. These are called feel good hormones or rather feel good chemicals. And they tend to boost contentment, they tend to boost self esteem and resilience. So, when you're recalling a positive memory, what you're doing is that you're disrupting a negative loop in the brain. And this is what happens. You will feel less depressed, less anxious, and you feel you're not being overwhelmed anymore. So it's just like charging your internal batteries with love, pride, and maybe success. So from the findings that I got to back up the scientific evidence of this habit that I've created the whole of 2025 is to look into my good memories. And there was a study that actually caught my attention, and that was a study that was done in 2014. And it was found out that people with higher resilience had a greater activity in the right side of the brain when they were recalling positive memories. So this suggested that memory was the key driver for resilience. So these people were put onto an exercise where their brain activities was monitored, and they were a cohort of group of people were told to think of bad memories. Another cohort was told to think of good memories, and another cohort was told to think about the neutral memories, or rather, then another cohort was told to reconsolidate their bad memories. Out of their bad memories, they think of a good thing that happened for them. And then their brain activity was monitored. So what happened is in the cohort that was thinking about the bad memories, there was lower brain activity. And for the cohort that was thinking about good memories, there was a higher brain activity. And for that cohort that was reconsolidating, what we call reconsolidation, in that you take a good memory out of the bad experience, their brain activity was also seen to be perfectly high. For those that were thinking about neutral memories, those that they never felt good about it or bad about it, there was literally no brain activity or rather lower brain activity. So what I drew from this study is that when you think about good memories, you tend to have higher resilience. And when you're having higher resilience, then your brain is also strengthened in the sense that even when a bad thing happens, you have a high drive for resilience. So in the long term, you have a better impact when you're training your brain to appreciate and think about good memories. Okay. So when the next time you get into this exercise, think about a good memory and make it a habit, make it part of your system, and allow it to activate your brain reward system. Because it's going to activate my limbic system. So what remains this year is to look at the treasures. Treasures of good memories. Memories that will remind us of love, warmth, and legacy. So what such memory that will take us back again to the slopes of Mount Elgon, where I was born. That land that once we call the White Highlands. You see, they were called the Highlands because during the colonial time, uh, the time just before we are transformed after independence, my family, like many others, inherited very rhythms of farming. There is coffee, tea, maize, livestock. These were passed down from those who had all the products my mother managed was one day was the biggest
Look at you two. Absolutely perfect. Are you ready for Sunday?
project was to make a broad cup of tea for her children, her husband, and that was a project for her. It was such an interesting project that I choose to share as one of my greatest memories. So at that moment, she would rise with purpose, of course. So first came the kettle. So we had about 20 kettles. And what, because we were not mechanized at that particular point, it meant that everything that we did was manual. So for her, she had to wake up earlier than us, probably around 3 or 4. Then she would set water to boil, and this was water that the warm water that we wash the kettle under in the morning. You see, the kettle, when we have a belief that when we want our animals to give us produce, we sort of have to soak them. They need to feel comfortable for them to be able to produce comfortably. So what followed was preparing fields and also just clearing the pens. So then once the warm water was ready, the milking began. And this, of course, she did this with a crackle of radio. She swore. I mean, this, she swore that day that music made the cows be more generous. And perhaps it did because we used to get so much produce. We needed to get so much quantity of milk from these 20 cows. So she also had a handful of workers, and they actually worked together effortlessly to make sure that the process came to an end. So while she was able to multitask effortlessly, she also set a pot of water on fire while the milk was flowing. Right? So once the milk was collected and packaged for delivery like 5 kilometers away, she reserved 5 liters of her masterpiece. And this milk that she reserved was specifically for her African tea, which is her project masterpiece. So into the boiling water went a handful of Capreto tea leaves. If you come from the mountain, God, you know Capreto. And Capretta had the best cheese. Why? Because it was grown by locals from our own farms and processed by us. That was the secret of our tea. So she want the Capretta tea into the waters and just let the leaves release their earthly fragrance. So meanwhile, she will dash to the farm to give their compliments, of course, she got our fresh green maize and sweet potato from the field. So these accompaniments were essential for our breakfast. So what she normally did was wrap them in banana leaves and chuck them into the coals so that they roast slowly. And as they roast, the air will fill up with the smoky sweetness. So by the time she returned, the tea was ready for milk. So simmering into a creamy golden brown. So and then the magic, the savory aroma of freshly brewed tea mingling with maize and sweet potatoes, that fragrance would drift through the house, finding a way into our small noses and nudging us away. It actually wasn't an alarm clock that woke us up, but it was this love letter, innocent, and memory etched forever in my heart. So even today, when I sip a cup of Kenyan tea with the love, skill, and art, I am transported to those moments of mother's quiet symphony of work, to the laughter of childhood, to the warmth of a home built on resilience and care. That is my focus, and it is the sweetest news of all. What do God say about memories. Often, when we think about a memory, brain reconnection, right? We think of memories as the events that we create or rather the mistakes or the bad things that tend to have happened to us. But the Bible thinks of memory in a different perspective. So for God, remembering is not about recalling information. It's about faithful action and commitment. So the Bible tells us that God never forgets his promises. So we tend to have forgetfulness of our past, of what we did, but God does not forget his promises, his covenants to his people. Even if we forget, God acts on our behalf with steadfast love. And God gives him a promise that you will be the father of all nations. You'll have a covenant son who will birth a great nation. So, in this context, God tells him, God remembers his covenant that he made with Abraham. We see that God consistently remembers his covenant. In Exodus 2:24, we read that God had the groaning of Israelites. And when he had the groaning of Israelites, he remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So his memory ensures that his promises are never brought action. Think about the Noah part. Noah was promised that build an ark, and by the end of the 40 days and the 40 nights, I will reveal myself that I'm God to you. So in scripture, when God remembers, it means he moves. In Genesis 8:1, it's you. So his memory is compassion in action, in our weaknesses. In Psalms 103:14, God reminds us that he knows that we have our weaknesses, yet he remembers. He reminds us in Isaiah that, yes, a nursing child can forget his child, but I cannot forget you. That is compassion in action. Is also a means of forgiveness. Look at Jeremiah 31:34 and look at Hebrews 8:12. It says, thus declares the Lord, that he remembers sins no more. He chooses not to hold them against us. So through Christ, he treats us as we have never seen. He treats us though we are as we are his beloved. So yes, we have sinned, but God designs his memory to just love us, to just forget our former sins. At that particular point, he was advanced in age. His wife was advanced in age, was promised to be the father of all nations. From the story of Mary, we can draw that God remembers past acts of faithfulness and future promises. You can look at Mary's songs in Luke 1, chapter 54 to 55. She is praising God for remembering his mercy to Israel. His memory is stretching across history into eternity, right? So this tells us that God is not only focused on the present, but he's stretching into eternity. He's stretching into how his mercy is going to cover his people. He's going to embrace us. He's going to take us to a higher level. So when the Bible says God remembers, it is not just about recollection of memories. It's more of action. It's more of the compassion of God. It's more of the covenant keeping God. It's forgiveness for us. So his memory becomes the assurance that he will never abandon us. It says, God remembered Noah and the water receded. So we think about memory. Look at Abraham.